Welcome back. If you just joined us, you're watching Diplomatic Channel. Our guest this week is Dr. Nouruddine Jabnoun, a faculty member at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies in Washington, D.C., where his research interests include governance issues and security challenges of North Africa and the Sahel region. Having served and taught in various capacities in the United States as it concerns security, he currently teaches also at Georgetown University's Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. In this interview with our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Maria Bird, he discusses the impact of the Global Terrorism Summit held in the U.S. Capitol and how to keep groups like Boko Haram in check.
Dr. Jabnoun, we know that oppression is a discussion when we look at various countries across the continent of Africa. But what are some of the other foundational issues that do create some of the terrorism that we see?
Well, you have, I would say, foreign occupation play in favor of oppression, but also I have to go to this, I would say, indigenous roots of violence extremism. Governments that emerged in post-colonial era, they failed to deliver. And when they failed to deliver, they created a kind of vacuum across their territory. And we saw this kind of retreat of the state from the society. And this kind of gap between the population, between the aspiration, the legitimate aspiration of the population, and between leadership, mainly, I would say, mismanaging the resource of the country. And this is radicalized the people. Of course, the ideological factor, such as religious factor, was used by those groups to justify their attacks and to justify violence. But at the end of the day, it's a political issue. If you look at, for example, in the 60s in Europe, you will see the what they call the left-wing Marxist-Leninist in Italy, across in Germany. Those movements evolved in the 60s, and I will say they're a kind of anti-funnel movement. You oppress one movement and you get another one. We started in the 80s with the jihad in Egypt. Then we get involved in the assassination of President Sadat. Then we get later Al-Qaeda in the mid-90s and after September 11. And then the radicalization of Al-Qaeda, we get this kind of new offshoot called like the ISIL or the Islamic State. So.
And you mentioned ISIS and the Islamic State.
Yep.
Now, that's one of the other criticisms, obviously, that the U.S. Terrorism Summit has taken on, is the focus more on some of the radicalism in the Middle East and the Islamic State, more so than looking at areas in Africa or other parts of the world.
Yeah, I agree with you. When we talk about Africa, for example, if you take the case of Libya. Libya is a country, I would say it's a country located across three main important regions. It's an African Sahel country, it's a Mediterranean country with the longest coastline, and it's a North African country. So today you hear in the media talking about a failed state without understanding the dynamic within Libya. But if this idea of failure happened in Libya, I would say Southern Europe won't deal only with Libya. It will deal with one of those regions. Will have a failed region, like the whole North Africa, or the whole Sahel, or even the whole Mediterranean area. And the presence of ICE recently in Sirte or in Derna, this didn't happen from vacuum. So when the birthplace of Muammar al-Gaddafi, Sirte, fell in September 2011, so we saw kind of overwhelming repression from those militias against the city of Muammar Gaddafi. And therefore his tribe, the Gdafa, the Amamra, and the Warfella, who were living in the city, they lived under kind of alienation. And therefore, when ICE started getting a kind of foothold in the city, we saw a kind of neutrality or even a kind of indulgence from those tribes. And because they were alienated by the new regime or by those militias, and therefore they thought that it's better perhaps to accept this group and to show to the rest of the Libyans that look what you did to us, and therefore we are ready to ally even with those guys, with those bad guys.
Now, when you talk about organizations like ISIS, and then we talk about Boko Haram, what are the similarities? I know we've mentioned, you know, oppression, and those oftentimes create some of what we see today in terrorist factions, but are there any similarities, or are the issues very different?
I think the main similarity between both of them is playing what they call the sectarian strife. Libya, it's a homogeneous country. You don't have Christian. So they kidnapped Egyptian Christians and they killed them. You don't have Shia in Libya, like in Iraq. Means what Boko Haram is doing in Nigeria is playing the card of sectarian strife. Means if I will target like Christian segment within the Nigerian society, even I will say Muslims are target too, means I will create this kind of split, this kind of rift within the Nigerian society. So this is the similarity, is trying to exploit the I will say not only the ethnic but mainly the sectarian playing the sectarian fabric. This is the most similarity, and of course the violence. You know, the violence doesn't have any limit for those two organizations. What they want to do is mainly to have a kind of psychological impact on the people. You kill one and you create a kind of panic for 1,000 people. So.
Now, when you talk about counterterrorism and those who are specializing in this area, and we're looking at strategies, and that's been the major discussion, I guess, over the past few months, and I'm assuming it will continue as various other summits, I'm sure, across the world will spring up. What are some of the strategies that can be in place? Because you're looking at security issues. I mean, especially when you look at Nigeria, the elections and security issues, and in other African nations. What are some of the strategies that will be put in place? And is this a world effort, or does it have to be the local governments or the national governments to put these in place?
I think we have to start with the local government. And local government